everyone. So video number 2, so I'm just talking about the relative privation hypothesis and just showing why it's, when you look at it, when you break it down, when you deconstruct this argument that because some people are more severe than you, they're more deserving of support, that you should go with less just because there are people who are more severe than you. When you break this down, you can show how absurd it is. So I'm just breaking it down and just using some philosophical thought experiments here, just to kind of shine a light on its absurdity. So just because somebody has it worse in inverted commas, does not mean that your problems don't count. By that logic, nobody on earth has any problems, except for whatever poor person out of 7 billion people has it the worst. Yeah, if you're going to take that argument to extreme levels, then you can see that ultimately no one's problem counts, apart from that one person who happens to have it the worst, because there's always that one person, and yet even that person doesn't have it the worst of all, because they're still alive. The next level is death. That's why I call it the fallacy of infinite regress as well, or the doom loop, the kind of the bandwagon of infinite doom. Dragging us all down to that lowest common denominator, and ultimately no one gets helped. That's the capitalist mentality, ultimately. So, the could be worst fallacy, that's another name for it, the could be worst fallacy, is utilitarian absurdity. If someone presented 2 options, neither of those options are necessarily good, just because one option may be less bad. Just because you could be worse doesn't make your situation any better. We are debating here my needs, or it could be your needs, whoever is the person asking for support. But ultimately, when someone goes to get support, all that matters right there in that moment is their predicament. They're not thinking about all the people who have it worse than them. That would be a huge burden to bear. Could you imagine it if every single struggle was lumped on your shoulders? It was put on your shoulders, that would be a huge burden to bear. No one should have to bear that. In that moment, you're not taking the weight of the world on your shoulders. There are people who are in worse difficulties than you. There are people who are dying in Gaza. But at that moment in time, when you're asking for support, all that matters is your own needs, your own predicament. So it's really not helpful for someone to come along and say, oh, but there are people who are more severe than you, That's really offensive and showing lack of empathy, and it's just not appropriate. They might be correct on that very rational level, but it's not going to help you. That statistical analysis, that objectivity, that rational facts is not going to help you in that moment. It's offensive, it's demeaning. We just don't do it, it's rude. Because at that moment in time, all that matters to you is your need for support. Your needs are like the centre of your universe at that moment in time. And it basically feels like you're not being listened to, that you don't matter, that your needs are just worthless. So the severity of others, or what else is going on in the world right now, is irrelevant when you're trying to get support. So I am severe. When I say I am severe, or my OCD is severe, or my autism is severe for that matter, I'm not saying that others aren't more severe than me. There are people with autism who are more severe than me. I'm not discounting that, but when I'm saying right in this moment, because my autism is experienced as severe, when I'm saying my autism is severe or my OCD is severe, it's just a statement of fact for me. It's an existential fact. It's not saying that others are less severe, or that I'm the severest of all. It's not saying that. It's just simply a statement of fact, of existential fact about what I'm going through, and it's not a preposition to be argued with. So in such a case, oh, but others are more severe, that isn't actually strictly speaking an argument. That's just a distraction from my own needs. So, imagine this scenario. So you're walking down the street and you see a kid drowning in a pond. You move to pull the kid out of the pond, but then you think, hold on, there's probably a kid drowning more painfully in a much dirtier pond somewhere else in the world. So moving to pull this kid out would be selfish because there are greater needs, there are greater problems, some are in more severe difficulty than this kid, so I'm just not going to bother. So I don't pull the kid out. So if that seems ridiculous, then so does the relative privation argument. So when you complain about a problem and a listener points out that there are people with way worse problems than you, therefore your problems are not a big deal in comparison. Yeah, when you complain about a problem, the listener points out that there are people with way worse problems than you. They're basically saying that your problems are no big deal in comparison. That's what they're saying, and that's offensive. Because what matters right now is your need for support. There are people who don't have any fingers or arms or legs at all, so therefore your struggles are invalid. This is basically what's called the Oppression Olympics. I might do a video on that separately, so I want to do a little research on that. But yeah, it's called the Oppression Olympics. So it turns systemic inequality into a harmful competition. It uses different forms of oppression as a weapon against others who are also marginalised. It's also known as the scarcity mentality. And we need to challenge this scarcity mentality. That's the idea that there are limited resources, so everyone has to fight over a limited amount of resources, and some people have greater needs than others, so they should get seen first and others fuck them, basically. Because it's a very capitalist mentality, because everyone has needs and everyone's needs are worthy, and ultimately there's enough for everyone. And it's about challenging this idea that there's a lack of resources when there isn't, we need to tax the rich, that basically this capitalist mindset, this neoliberal mindset of competition, we need to challenge, because it's deeply unhealthy. And really, they just need to be honest. It's about gatekeeping and rationing. They just need to say up front, it's because we're trying to make cuts. If you're not this bullshitting around, someone more severe than you, it's got nothing to do with that. It's because they're trying to make cuts and they need to just be honest about it. But yeah, just because there are worse things happening doesn't mean that other problems should be ignored. It's the appeal to bigger problems, that's another name for this fallacy. So, in other words, someone's arguments about their issues are minimised, deemed unimportant, dismissed on grounds that there are more important topics, issues exist. Dismissed on the grounds that more important topics and issues exist, regardless of whether these problems are actually relevant. So it's basically a red herring, isn't it? You could say it's a red herring. It's regardless of whether these problems are relevant to the question at hand or not. But there are children starving in Africa, that's basically another... more, people are aware, what's often said, particularly in the past. I think people probably don't do it so much anymore because it is basically offensive as an argument and kind of ethnocentric and everything else, but people historically, particularly in the past, in less enlightened times, people often say, eat your greens, whatever, there are children starving in Africa, whatever. That's an example of this relative privation argument. So yeah, with the implication that any issue less serious is not worthy of discussion. So yeah, imagine that a person with one leg meets someone who doesn't have any legs, and then that person meets someone who doesn't have both legs and an arm. You can go on like this forever. There's no point using this argument as there's always going to be someone who has it worse. It's not a competition. There can be serious problems, and the person next to you could be having some problems, but even worse. And that knowledge does not help your own problems. You have every right to get support, no matter how minor or major the problem is deemed to be by other people, and you have every right to be treated like your problems matter. It can always get worse, but it can also always get better as well from a quantitative standpoint. However, this isn't really how suffering is actually experienced in an existential level. So really, when it comes down to it, services are not really based on your own severity of your needs, your quality of life. Really, it's about closing the doors to save money. That's what it's actually about. It's a moving feast of infinite regress towards death, which is ultimately the most severe outcome of all, and ultimately no one gets seen. Because that's what ultimately the capitalist dream, not to serve anyone. They just want to serve profit. They want to make money. They don't care about your needs. So yeah, it's cuts by the back door. I mean, there's probably one person on this planet that has it the worst of all, but it doesn't actually matter if they're the only one able to ask for help. And that one person probably also hears others are more severe as well. Imagine breaking your leg and having others tell you that you shouldn't be any pain because someone else has a brain tumour. Everyone is trying to fix their thing, and this thing is entirely independent from everyone else's life. My leg is broken. Well, some people are in wheelchairs. You're not worth my time. Imagine how offensive that would be. Okay, so your comments now, just very quickly. So one of you has said, that made the comment that you can't have it both ways, surely, because I've also been told, you have also been told that you're too severe for ordinary therapy. So I've been told that I'm too severe for ordinary therapy or too complex, and now they're saying that others are more severe than me. So the point you're making, the good point, the excellent point you're making is that obviously you can't have it both ways. I describe it, by the way, as being like a Schrodinger patient. I'm both too severe. I'm both severe, but not severe. Like you can't have it. I'm like, yeah. Basically, it's a riddle. Yeah. And you make a point that you say that I know from my support groups that people who have had treatment at Maudsley Hospital, that's the national centre which I was asking for, wanting to get referral to. You can see people across the country, and you could be online as well. You don't have to go in person. But yeah, you make a point that you know from your support groups, people who have had treatment at Maudsley Hospital, and they were objectively not as severe as you. So you can't see why you or I, because you've also got OCD and very similar to me in terms of how it affects you. You can't see why you or I wouldn't meet the criteria for referral there. And you also see this happening with ASD 1, 2, 3, etc., in which people with level 1 are assumed to not be disabled because their support needs are being compared to level 3s and not to non-disabled people. We should be compared to non-disabled people instead, not other disabled people. Exactly. You know, we need to be, because it's pointless and futile comparing to other disabled people. It's like an infinite regress thing, and it just breeds resentment. Ultimately, how are you faring compared to people who don't have your problems? So like non-disabled people, ultimately you want to be, obviously I'm always going to be disabled, but ultimately like your difficulty should be compared to like the norm in society, those who aren't disabled, and obviously that shows how severe you are because you can't do all these things that other people take for granted. You shouldn't be compared to other people with other disabilities because that's just meaningless comparison. Support, you say that the support offered should be based exclusively on what you need. None of us should be denied treatment because others have greater support needs. I would hate it if level 1 autistics or people whose OCD impacts their day-to-day life less than mine does would be told they weren't eligible for support they need because there are people like me with greater support needs. Exactly, I'd be pissed off as well. That would be incredibly offensive because everyone deserves support. And then you make the point that you've always thought that CBT with exposure and response prevention was the first line treatment for OCD and that medication is secondary. Yeah, I think you are correct according to NICE